The distance closes when you're not looking. Someone leans forward in conversation. Their voice drops slightly. You can feel the shift in the room, the way attention reorganizes itself around certain people, while others fade into the periphery. Maybe it's the executive whose emails get immediate responses while yours languish in inboxes. Maybe it's the friend whose suggestions become group decisions, while yours are politely acknowledged and forgotten. Or maybe it's just the quiet understanding that some people command presence effortlessly, while you're perpetually negotiating for scraps of recognition. And without realizing it, something ancient stirs in your awareness. If I don't learn this language, I'll spend my life speaking to empty rooms. Max Weber spent decades studying this invisible architecture of human respect. He observed how certain individuals, regardless of their official position or credentials, possessed what he called legitimate authority. Not the authority granted by titles or force, but the kind that emerges from within and commands recognition instinctively. And buried in his massive body of work on power, bureaucracy, and social order, Weber identified something extraordinary. 4 specific words that, when genuinely embodied, transform how people perceive and respond to you. Not manipulation, not performance, but authentic communication of a quality that humans are evolutionarily wired to respect. Today, I'm revealing Weber's framework for instant respect, and why these 4 words, properly understood, change everything about how you move through the world. Weber began his investigation into authority by observing a curious pattern. In every organization he studied, from religious movements to political parties to business enterprises, certain individuals wielded influence that far exceeded their formal power. They weren't necessarily the loudest voices or the most credentialed experts. They possessed something else, something that made their words carry weight, their presence command attention, their suggestions become adopted without argument. Weber called this charismatic authority, and he became obsessed with understanding its mechanics, not the superficial charm of a salesperson or the manufactured confidence of a motivational speaker, the deep structural quality that genuine leaders, prophets, and transformative figures throughout history all shared. He wanted to know if this quality could be articulated, understood, and cultivated, rather than simply being an accident of birth or personality. What Weber discovered challenged everything sociology thought it knew about power and influence. Because traditional analysis suggested respect came from 3 sources: rational legal authority derived from your position in a hierarchy, traditional authority inherited through lineage or custom, or charismatic authority that was essentially magical and inexplicable. But Weber found something more fundamental beneath the charismatic type. A specific communication pattern that all genuinely respected individuals used, often without conscious awareness. 4 words that weren't actually about the words themselves, but about the psychological and social dynamics they represented. When Weber wrote about charisma, he emphasized that it's not an inherent trait, but a relationship between leader and followers. The charismatic person is recognized as such because they demonstrate certain qualities that fulfill deep human needs. And those needs, Weber realized, could be distilled into 4 essential human longings that, when addressed, create instant recognition of legitimate authority. The first word Weber identified was certainty, but not the false certainty of the ideologue or the dogmatic certainty of the fundamentalist. Weber meant something far more sophisticated, the certainty of someone who has genuinely grappled with complexity and emerged with conviction born from understanding rather than ignorance. In The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber examined how certain religious leaders commanded absolute devotion, not through force, but through their capacity to provide certainty in an uncertain world. They offered clear answers to the fundamental questions that tormented their followers. Not simple answers, but answers that demonstrated mastery of the complexities while still providing direction. Weber observed that in moments of social disruption, economic upheaval, or existential crisis, people desperately seek certainty, not because they're weak or stupid, but because the human nervous system requires stable frameworks to function. Ambiguity creates anxiety. Complexity without resolution creates paralysis. And the person who can acknowledge complexity while still offering clear direction becomes instantly valuable, instantly respected. This is why leaders who say, "I don't know," constantly lose authority, while those who say, "Here's what I know, and here's what remains uncertain," gain it. The former communicates incompetence or indecisiveness. The latter communicates honest mastery. When you encounter a genuinely respected voice in any field, notice how they provide certainty, not about everything, which would be obviously false, but about their domain of expertise. The surgeon who says, "This is the procedure I recommend based on your condition," while acknowledging outcomes vary and here are the specific risks, commands more respect than one who either pretends perfect knowledge or expresses perpetual doubt. The certainty they offer is bounded, honest, and grounded in genuine expertise. This is the first word. Not performative confidence, but legitimate conviction born from actual understanding. When you speak with this quality, something in the human animal recognizes it immediately. You're not guessing. You're not performing. You know. And knowing, truly knowing even a specific domain deeply, makes you instantly valuable in a world drowning in uncertainty. But Weber discovered certainty alone creates authoritarians, not authentic authorities. Therefore, the second word became essential: vulnerability. And here, Weber's insight becomes revolutionary. Because conventional wisdom suggests vulnerability undermines authority. Show weakness and people lose respect. Admit limitation and you forfeit credibility. But Weber observed the opposite pattern in genuinely charismatic figures throughout history. They demonstrated strategic vulnerability that actually enhanced their authority rather than diminishing it. Weber studied religious prophets who openly discussed their struggles with doubt, their moments of despair, their ongoing wrestle with the divine. Far from undermining their authority, this vulnerability made their certainty more credible, because if someone pretends they've never doubted, never struggled, never faced the abyss, their certainty seems shallow, unearned, performative. But when someone reveals they've walked through hell and emerged with conviction, that conviction carries the weight of authentic testing. This is the crucial distinction Weber identified. Vulnerability without resolution creates pity or discomfort. You become the person others feel sorry for rather than respect. But vulnerability that leads to wisdom, strength, or transformation creates profound respect because it demonstrates you've earned your authority through genuine struggle. Think of the sponsor in a recovery program who shares their story of addiction and redemption. Their vulnerability about hitting bottom doesn't undermine their authority to guide others through recovery. It establishes it. Because everyone in that room knows they're listening to someone who has navigated the exact territory they're trying to cross. Or consider the business leader who openly discusses the failure that taught them their most important lessons. That vulnerability doesn't make them seem weak. It makes their subsequent success seem harder won, more legitimate, more instructive. Weber understood that humans respect scarring. We respect evidence of battles fought and survived. Not the performance of invulnerability, but the demonstration that you've been tested and transformed by that testing. This creates what Weber called the wounded healer dynamic. Those who have suffered meaningfully and integrated that suffering into wisdom become the most respected guides precisely because of, not despite, their wounds. But there's a delicate calibration required. Share too much vulnerability too soon, and you overwhelm people, making them your therapist rather than your follower. Share too little and you seem artificial, untested, untrustworthy. The respected voice shares strategic vulnerability, enough to establish credibility and connection, enough to prove their certainty was earned through real struggle, but not so much that it becomes their identity or burden on others. This balance is what Weber called charismatic discipline, the ability to be genuinely vulnerable while maintaining your role as guide, rather than collapsing into the role of victim-seeking rescue. Because Weber recognized certainty plus vulnerability creates credibility. Therefore, the third word emerged as essential: purpose. And here Weber's analysis becomes even more profound because he understood that respected individuals don't just know things or have overcome things. They serve something beyond themselves. In his lectures on politics as a vocation and science as a vocation, Weber examined why certain professors commanded rooms while others with equal credentials were ignored, why certain politicians inspired movements while others with identical platforms failed to gain traction. The difference was always purpose. Not generic purpose like, I want to help people or I believe in justice. Weber meant specific, articulated, lived purpose that organized the person's entire existence around something transcendent. The charismatic leader, Weber observed, is always in service to a calling that exceeds personal ambition. They're not trying to be respected. They're trying to accomplish something that requires respect to achieve. And that distinction changes everything about how people respond to them. When you speak from genuine purpose, from a calling larger than your own success or validation, people sense it immediately. Your communication shifts from "look at me" to "look at this," from "respect my authority" to "join this mission." And paradoxically, this shift generates far more respect than direct attempts to command it, because humans are wired to follow those who serve something worth following. We're tribal animals looking for leaders worthy of our loyalty, and we determine worthiness not by credentials or confidence, but by asking whether this person is devoted to something that justifies devotion. Weber studied religious movements where charismatic founders commanded absolute loyalty, not through personal charisma alone, but through their obvious subordination to a divine calling. Their followers respected them because they first respected what their leaders served. This pattern appears everywhere once you see it. The teacher who commands respect isn't the one performing authority, but the one obviously devoted to student growth. The entrepreneur who attracts talent isn't the one with the biggest ego, but the one serving a vision that others want to participate in. The parent who earns genuine respect from adult children isn't the one who demanded obedience, but the one who demonstrated devotion to principles worth respecting. Purpose transforms communication because it removes neediness. When you need respect, you subtly manipulate for it, which everyone senses and instinctively resists. When you serve purpose, respect becomes a byproduct of your obvious devotion rather than your primary goal. And Weber identified the specific marker that distinguishes genuine purpose from performed purpose. Genuine purpose makes demands on you. It costs you something. It requires sacrifice, discipline, ongoing commitment even when inconvenient. Performed purpose is what you claim when it benefits you and abandon when it doesn't. Genuine purpose is visible in your choices, your schedule, your sacrifices. You can tell what someone actually serves by what they're willing to suffer for. This is why respected voices often have a quality of severity or seriousness about them. Not because they're humorless or rigid, but because they're accountable to something that demands their best rather than their comfort. When you speak from this place, from genuine accountability to purpose larger than yourself, something shifts in how others perceive you. They recognize you're not performing leadership. You're serving something worth leading toward, and that recognition generates instant respect. But Weber observed that certainty, vulnerability, and purpose still don't complete the picture. Therefore, the fourth word became necessary: invitation. And this is where Weber's framework becomes truly dangerous, because it reveals that genuine respect can never be demanded or manipulated, but only invited through creating space for others to recognize authority freely. In Economy and Society, Weber's massive analysis of social organization, he repeatedly emphasized that charismatic authority is legitimated by recognition of the followers, not imposed by the leader. The charismatic figure doesn't force compliance. They inspire recognition, and that recognition must be freely given, or it isn't actually respect but merely obedience born from fear or social pressure. This distinction is everything. Forced respect is brittle, temporary, and breeds resentment. Invited respect is robust, self-reinforcing, and generates loyalty. Weber studied the difference by examining why some authority structures collapsed the moment external pressure was removed, while others persisted through generations. The difference was always whether followers chose their submission or had it extracted from them. Invitation means creating space for others to see, understand, and voluntarily align with your certainty, vulnerability, and purpose, rather than forcing or manipulating that alignment. It's the opposite of the loud voice that demands attention or the sales tactic that manufactures urgency. Invitation trusts that if you embody genuine authority, those capable of recognizing it will do so naturally, and those who don't recognize it weren't your people anyway. This requires tremendous confidence. The confidence to let your work speak rather than constantly promoting it, to let your character reveal itself through action rather than declaration, to trust that authentic authority attracts its proper recognition without manipulation. Weber observed that genuinely charismatic figures throughout history shared this quality of non-neediness. They extended invitation through their presence, their work, their message. But they didn't chase validation or frantically market themselves. They trusted that what was genuine would be recognized by those ready to see it. This creates what Weber called selective affinity. You naturally attract those who resonate with your certainty, who relate to your vulnerability, who align with your purpose, and you naturally repel those who don't. Both processes are equally important. Because universal respect is impossible, and attempting it dilutes your authority into generic pleasantness that commands nothing. The respected voice accepts that they will be misunderstood, rejected, or ignored by many. And that's not failure, but necessary filtration. The people who matter, the people who can actually work with you toward shared purpose, will recognize your authority, because it speaks directly to their needs, values, and aspirations. Everyone else's lack of recognition is information, not rejection. Weber emphasized this point repeatedly. Charismatic authority is not universal. It's recognized by specific communities who share the charismatic figure's understanding of what matters. Attempting to be respected by everyone is the surest way to be respected by no one, because you'll dilute your specific power into generic appeal. Invitation also means asking, rather than telling when possible. Not because you're uncertain, but because you respect others' agency and intelligence. Here's what I see. What do you see? Invites collaboration rather than demanding submission. I've found this approach effective. Might it work for your situation? Create space for others to adopt your wisdom freely rather than feeling it imposed on them. This is incredibly difficult for people socialized to believe authority means having all answers and brooking no questions. But Weber observed that the most enduring authority figures combined certainty about principles with openness about application, conviction about direction, with curiosity about others' perspectives. They didn't need to dominate conversations because their authority was secure enough to create space for other voices. And paradoxically, that generosity of attention generated even more respect because it demonstrated confidence rather than insecurity. The person who must always be right, always be speaking, always be centered, reveals deep uncertainty about their authority. The person who can listen deeply, consider alternative views, and still maintain clear direction reveals authority so genuine it doesn't need constant performance. Now here's where Weber's framework becomes truly transformative. Because these four words, certainty, vulnerability, purpose, and invitation, aren't actually separate components but facets of a unified state of being. Weber called this charismatic presence, and he insisted it cannot be faked long-term because it requires genuine internal development rather than external technique. You cannot perform certainty if you haven't done the work to actually know something deeply. You cannot fake vulnerability if you haven't genuinely faced and integrated your struggles. You cannot pretend purpose if you're not actually devoted to something beyond your self-interest. And you cannot authentically invite if you're desperate for validation. This is why Weber's framework is ultimately about becoming rather than doing. Becoming the kind of person who naturally embodies these four qualities because you've genuinely developed them through real work in the real world. And that becoming is what he called the process of vocational clarity, finding what you're called to serve and developing yourself in service to that calling until your very presence communicates legitimate authority. Weber studied this process across different domains. In science, the scholar who earns respect isn't the one with the most publications, but the one who demonstrates genuine devotion to truth, acknowledges the limits of current knowledge honestly, and invites others into the collaborative work of discovery. In politics, the leader who commands loyalty isn't the one who promises easy solutions, but the one who articulates complex realities clearly, admits their own limitations transparently, serves a vision larger than personal power, and invites citizens into shared responsibility rather than passive followership. In business, the executive who inspires isn't the one performing confidence, but the one who demonstrates genuine expertise, shares lessons from failures candidly, pursues a mission that attracts talent, and creates cultures where others can contribute meaningfully. The pattern is identical across every domain. These four qualities, genuinely embodied, create instant recognition and respect. But Weber warned about specific pitfalls that derail people attempting to develop these qualities. The first pitfall is confusing certainty with rigidity. Genuine certainty can hold complexity and update with new information while maintaining core conviction. Rigid certainty refuses new data and becomes brittle, losing respect when reality inevitably contradicts fixed beliefs. Weber observed that charismatic figures often revised their positions based on new understanding, but maintained coherent direction through those revisions. Their certainty was about principles and purpose, not about every tactical detail. They could admit I was wrong about the method while maintaining I remain certain about the destination. This flexibility within conviction is what kept their authority legitimate over time, rather than collapsing under the weight of inevitable errors. The second pitfall is performing vulnerability rather than living it. Calculated sharing of weakness, designed to manipulate connection, backfires because people sense the difference between authentic revelation and strategic disclosure. Weber noted that genuine vulnerability emerges naturally from a person who has truly integrated their struggles, not from someone using their trauma as social currency. The respected voice shares vulnerability when relevant to someone else's growth, not to center their own suffering or harvest sympathy. This requires tremendous self-awareness, the ability to distinguish between sharing this serves the conversation and sharing this serves my need for attention or validation. Most people fail this distinction, either oversharing in ways that burden others or undersharing in ways that seem inauthentic. The integrated person shares vulnerably and appropriately, in right measure, at right times, for right reasons. The third pitfall is mistaking activity for purpose. Many people confuse being busy with serving something meaningful. They work constantly, but for what? Weber emphasized that purpose isn't simply doing a lot or even doing well. It's devotion to something that justifies the devotion. You can be a wildly successful entrepreneur accumulating wealth without serving any purpose beyond your own enrichment. That generates a certain kind of respect, but it's thin, based on envy or fear rather than genuine recognition of authority. The person serving genuine purpose often makes less money, gains less fame, achieves less conventional success, but they command deeper respect because people sense they're accountable to something worth being accountable to. This distinction is painful for many to face because it means acknowledging that your impressive credentials or achievements might not constitute real purpose. You might have excelled at a game that doesn't matter, accumulated markers of success that don't signify service to anything beyond your own advancement. Weber insisted that confronting this possibility is essential for developing genuine authority rather than just impressive performance. The fourth pitfall is invitation that's actually manipulation disguised as generosity. Some people learn to use questions as weapons, feigning curiosity while actually imposing their agenda through seemingly open-ended inquiry. Others create appearance of space for others while actually controlling outcomes through subtle pressure. Weber noted that authentic invitation requires genuine openness to outcomes. You must be willing for others to decline, disagree, or choose differently than you would. Otherwise, your invitation is just a softer form of domination, and people sense that manipulation even if they can't articulate it. This is terrifying for people who believe they need control to maintain authority. But Weber observed the opposite pattern. The more genuinely open your invitation, the more freely people choose to follow, and the more robust that followership becomes because it's based on voluntary recognition rather than subtle coercion. This doesn't mean you have no boundaries or that all choices are equally valid. It means you trust your certainty, vulnerability, and purpose enough to allow others to recognize and align voluntarily, rather than forcing or manipulating that alignment. Understanding these pitfalls matters because Weber emphasized that developing genuine authority is lifelong work, not a weekend workshop or a set of communication tactics you can learn and deploy. You must actually become someone worthy of respect, and that becoming requires honest self-examination, genuine skill development, real sacrifice in service of purpose, and ongoing refinement of how you communicate all of that. There are no shortcuts. You cannot hack your way into legitimate authority. You must earn it through the slow, difficult work of genuine development. And Weber believed this was proper because authority should be hard to attain. If it were easy, it would be cheap, abundant, and meaningless. The difficulty is what makes it valuable. The years of study that create genuine certainty, the struggles that create authentic vulnerability, the sacrifice that proves real purpose, the confidence that enables true invitation. All of this takes time, pain, and commitment, and that investment is what makes your authority legitimate rather than performed. But Weber also observes something hopeful. Once these four qualities become genuinely integrated, they create a compounding effect. Your certainty makes your vulnerability more powerful rather than less, because it's clearly earned. Your vulnerability makes your certainty more credible because it's been tested. Your purpose makes both certainty and vulnerability matter because they're in service of something beyond you. And your invitation allows all three to reach those who need them, rather than being hoarded or forced on unreceptive audiences. This integration is what Weber called the charismatic moment, when all four qualities align in a person who has done the work to genuinely embody them. And when that alignment happens, respect isn't something you pursue, it becomes something people naturally extend, because you've become someone worth respecting. Now we need to address something Weber understood but many contemporary discussions of respect ignore. These four qualities don't guarantee you'll be liked or popular. In fact, Weber observed that genuinely respected figures were often deeply unpopular with those invested in existing power structures or comfortable illusions. Because certainty challenges those who profit from confusion, vulnerability threatens those who maintain authority through false invulnerability, purpose disturbs those content with meaningless success, and authentic invitation exposes those who maintain control through manipulation. This means developing genuine authority often generates opposition, criticism, and attack from those whose lesser authority is exposed by your greater legitimacy. Weber studied how charismatic figures throughout history faced exile, persecution, and execution, not because they were wrong but because they were right in ways that threatened existing orders. This pattern continues today in every domain where someone embodies authentic authority in spaces dominated by performance and politics. If you do this work, if you genuinely develop these four qualities, expect resistance. Expect to be called arrogant when you demonstrate genuine certainty. Expect to be called weak when you show authentic vulnerability. Expect to be called obsessive when you pursue real purpose. Expect to be called naive when you practice true invitation. These attacks will come primarily from those who cannot distinguish between genuine authority and performed authority, or worse, from those who sense the distinction and feel threatened by it. Weber warned that the path of developing legitimate authority is often lonely, because you'll outgrow relationships and environments that can't accommodate your growth. You'll become incompatible with people and places that demand you play small, perform false humility, or subordinate your purpose to collective mediocrity. This isn't because you've become arrogant. It's because you've become genuine. And many people, many spaces, many systems cannot tolerate genuine authority, because it exposes their reliance on performance and politics. But Weber also observed that along that lonely path, you discover something extraordinary. The people who do recognize genuine authority, who can meet you in that space of certainty, vulnerability, purpose, and invitation, become the most meaningful relationships of your life. Because they're not relating to your performance or your credentials or your social value. They're relating to your authentic self in service of authentic purpose. And those relationships, rare as they are, matter more than 1,000 shallow connections built on performance and mutual validation. Weber called these soul friendships or vocational communities, spaces where people united not by circumstances or convenience but by shared recognition of what matters and shared commitment to serving it. These connections sustain you through the opposition, the loneliness, the cost of developing and maintaining genuine authority. They remind you why this work matters, who it serves, what it builds. Without these connections, the path of genuine authority becomes unsustainable. With them, it becomes not just possible but profoundly meaningful. Let's make this practical. How do you actually develop these four qualities in your daily life, rather than just understanding them conceptually? Weber provided specific practices that genuinely transform character, rather than merely improving presentation. For certainty, he emphasized genuine study and real-world application, not consumption of content or accumulation of information, but deep engagement with a specific domain until you genuinely know it. This means reading primary sources, not just summaries, practicing skills until they're embodied, not just intellectually understood. testing theories in real situations and learning from failures. Teaching others what you've learned because teaching reveals gaps in your understanding. And accepting that genuine certainty in one domain means admitting ignorance in others. The person who claims expertise in everything has expertise in nothing. Legitimate certainty is bounded and specific. You develop it through thousands of hours in focused engagement with something that matters to you, until your knowledge is not just theoretical, but lived, tested, and refined through real-world application. For vulnerability, Weber recommended what he called controlled disclosure in service of connection and growth. This means examining your own struggles, failures, and limitations honestly in private first, integrating the lessons they contain, and then sharing them strategically when doing so serves someone else's development or deepens meaningful relationship. This is not therapy in public or trauma dumping for sympathy. It's mature sharing of integrated experience in ways that illuminate truth and build authentic connection. The practice is this: when you face difficulty, feel it fully rather than bypassing it. Extract meaning from it through reflection and often conversation with trusted others. Integrate that meaning into your understanding and behavior, and then share it when relevant to someone else's journey. This transforms vulnerability from weakness into wisdom, from burden into bridge. It prevents the two common errors: oversharing that overwhelms others and undersharing that seems inauthentic. You develop healthy vulnerability by genuinely processing your struggles, rather than either suppressing them or broadcasting them unprocessed. For purpose, Weber insisted on what he called the calling question. Not what do you want to do, but what is demanding to be done through you. What problem in the world needs solving that you have unique capacity to address? What injustice needs confronting that you cannot look away from? What vision needs manifesting that consumes your imagination? This is not about choosing from a menu of career options, but discovering what's already choosing you if you're honest enough to listen. The practice is ruthless self-examination about what you're actually willing to suffer for, not what sounds noble or impressive, but what you cannot not do even when it costs you. Write it down, specific and clear. Not vague platitudes, but concrete articulation of what you're here to build, create, heal, or transform. Then organize your life, your calendar, your relationships, your resources around serving that purpose. Not perfectly, not immediately, but progressively, letting that North Star guide thousands of small decisions that accumulate into a life shaped by devotion rather than drift. Purpose isn't found in a moment of revelation. It's clarified through years of honest engagement with what matters to you and disciplined alignment of your choices with that mattering. For invitation, Weber taught the practice of creating surplus space in conversations and relationships. Most people fill all available space with their own voice, their own needs, their own agenda. The practice of invitation is deliberately creating more space than you fill, more room than you occupy. In conversation, ask more questions than you answer. In meetings, listen longer than you speak. In relationships, offer more curiosity about the other person's experience than insistence on your own perspective. This is incredibly difficult for people trained to believe authority means dominating airspace. But Weber observed that genuine authority doesn't need to dominate. It can create space because its legitimacy isn't threatened by other voices. The practice is this: in every interaction, consciously create 20% more space than feels comfortable. Ask one more question. Listen 10 seconds longer before responding. Reflect back what you heard to confirm understanding before offering your view. Acknowledge the validity and perspectives different from yours even while maintaining your own position. This develops the muscle of invitation, the capacity to honor others' agency and intelligence while still providing direction grounded in your certainty, vulnerability, and purpose. These practices work because they develop the actual substance of the four qualities rather than the appearance of them. You cannot fake certainty that comes from 10,000 hours of genuine study. You cannot perform vulnerability that emerges from truly integrated struggle. You cannot pretend purpose that's clarified through ruthless self-examination and disciplined alignment. You cannot simulate invitation that flows from genuine confidence and respect for others. The practices create the reality, and the reality generates the respect. Not because you're trying to be respected, but because you've become someone naturally worthy of it through the unglamorous daily work of genuine development. Weber's 4 words are not magic incantations. They're descriptions of qualities that must be genuinely embodied through years of deliberate practice and real-world testing. Certainty, vulnerability, purpose, invitation. Together, they create what Weber called legitimate authority, the kind that generates instant recognition and enduring respect not through force or manipulation, but through the natural human response to encountering someone who has done the work to become genuinely worthy of following. And becoming that person is the most difficult and most important work you'll ever undertake, because it transforms not just how others see you, but who you actually are. This is not about social skills or communication tactics. This is about character development at the deepest level, the slow transformation from someone seeking respect to someone naturally embodying qualities that command it. If you recognize in yourself the hunger for genuine respect rather than shallow validation, if you're tired of performing authority you don't actually feel, if you sense you're capable of something more legitimate and lasting than the games people play for social status, then understand this. Weber's framework isn't offering you shortcuts. It's offering you a path, a difficult path that few complete because it demands genuine transformation rather than improved presentation. But for those willing to walk it, for those ready to develop certainty through real study, vulnerability through integrated struggle, purpose through ruthless alignment, and invitation through confident generosity, the destination is extraordinary. You become someone who doesn't seek respect because you naturally embody qualities that generate it. You become someone who doesn't demand authority because you legitimately possess it. You become someone others recognize instantly as worthy, not because you've learned to perform worthiness, but because you've done the work to actually become it. Weber believed this transformation was available to anyone willing to pay its price, and that price is time, effort, honesty, and sacrifice in service of genuine development. No one can walk this path for you. No course can give you its fruits without your labor. But for those who commit to it, who genuinely engage these 4 qualities as lifelong practices rather than weekend workshops, respect stops being something you chase and becomes something you embody. And that embodiment changes everything about how you move through the world, how others respond to you, what becomes possible in your relationships and your work. You stop performing leadership and start being someone worth following. You stop marketing yourself and start creating value others naturally recognize. You stop demanding respect and start living in ways that generate it effortlessly as byproduct of who you've genuinely become. The 4 words Weber identified, certainty, vulnerability, purpose, invitation, are ultimately not about gaining respect from others. They're about becoming someone you can respect when you look in the mirror, someone who knows what they know and admits what they don't. Someone who has faced their struggles and been shaped rather than broken by them. Someone who serves something beyond themselves with discipline and devotion. Someone who creates space for others to recognize and align freely, rather than forcing or manipulating connection. When you become that person, respect from others follows naturally. Not from everyone, but from those whose respect actually matters, because they can recognize genuine authority when they encounter it. And that recognition, freely given by people who see truly, matters infinitely more than the forced validation or fearful compliance that substitutes for respect in spaces dominated by performance and politics. This is Weber's gift to you. Not techniques for seeming respectable, but a framework for becoming worthy of respect through genuine development of qualities that humans are evolutionarily wired to recognize and honor. The question isn't whether you can learn 4 magic words that manipulate people into respecting you. The question is whether you're willing to undertake years of difficult work to embody 4 essential qualities that transform who you are at your core. That work is available to you starting now. Every conversation is opportunity to practice invitation. Every challenge is opportunity to develop vulnerability. Every hour of focused study is investment in genuine certainty. Every alignment of your choices with your calling is service to authentic purpose. The work is simple but not easy. And for those who commit to it, who genuinely engage this path of becoming rather than performing, the transformation is total and irreversible. You don't learn to get respect. You become someone naturally worthy of it. and that becoming changes everything. If this framework resonates with you, if you recognize the difference between performed authority and genuine legitimacy, if you're ready to stop chasing respect and start embodying qualities that naturally generate it, then I need you to do something. Write in the comments, "I choose becoming overperforming." Don't just read this and move on. Make that declaration public, because saying it to others helps you commit to it for yourself. And know that your comment helps others who are walking the same path feel less alone. Reminds them they're part of a community committed to genuine development rather than shallow performance. This matters. Your voice matters. Share it. And if you found value in Weber's framework for legitimate authority, you need to watch my next video where I reveal Weber's analysis of the iron cage, how modern rationalization traps even the most well-intentioned people in systems that destroy meaning, and more importantly, Weber's strategies for maintaining human dignity and authentic purpose within those systems without naive rejection or bitter resignation. That's the natural next step in understanding Weber's vision for how to live meaningfully in the modern world. Thank you for investing this time in genuine growth rather than cheap tactics. Keep building substance. Keep becoming someone worthy. I'll see you in the next dimension.